Hello, I'm Kathleen Marden, and I'm so happy to be with you today to speak about Betty and Barney Hill, the documented evidence, the impact, and the implications for humanity's future. Today, I'm going to be talking about the basic information pertaining to their UFO sighting and close encounter, the documented evidence, the hypnosis, the proliferation of false information, the new scientific analysis of the evidence, and the primary implications for humanity's future. Betty and Barney's case is the best evidence historical case that we have. It is the first scientifically investigated case of a close encounter and subsequent abduction in the United States of America. Betty and Barney were prominent people in their community. You see them and their dog, Delcy, who was with them on the trip. To the left, this is Stanton T. Friedman, nuclear physicist with whom I worked for nearly 14 years, and I at the American Philosophical Society doing research on the disinformants correspondence files regarding the Hill case. At the bottom left is my book with Stanton, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, the 60th anniversary edition. And I'm very proud to have received the International UFO Congress Lifetime Achievement Award in 2021 for my years of research. I take a little bit of responsibility for what Betty and Barney had occur because I had been to Niagara Falls that summer with my aunt and uncle, a different aunt and uncle, and we visited Niagara Falls. We had a wonderful time. And I was showing the family my photographs, and Barney said to Betty, "Do you think you might like to go there?" And she said yes. So on September 17, or earlier actually, mid-September. So in mid-September, Barney made a plan to surprise Betty during her week off from work as a social worker for the state of New Hampshire with a surprise trip to Niagara Falls. I'm very proud that the state of New Hampshire has erected this historical marker regarding the Betty and Barney Hill incident. It is an official marker. You can see the seal of the state of New Hampshire at the top of this marker. This is just a little bit of information about their 4 stops. The first stop was at 11:15 at the Mount Cleveland picnic area to look at this craft as it was coming in closer. They entered Cannon Mountain area at Franconia Notch, which was 4 miles south of Mount Cleveland, at 11:30 p.m. All times are approximate. Then they saw the craft hovering over a building, and when it passed over, its lights blinked out. A mile south of there at 11:40 p.m., the craft was hovering next to the Old Man of the Mountain. The Old Man of the Mountain is 48 feet from forehead to chin, and Betty and Barney stated that the craft was at least 1.5 to 2 times the length of the old man's profile. Stop number 3 happened at 12 a.m. approximately, and that is when they had left Franconia Notch. They were now in an area where there were motels, hotels, and tourist attractions, and the craft swooped down. It was 12 miles south of Cannon Mountain. This is an actual photograph Barney had to stop his car in the middle of the road. And at the top, you can see my sketch, my artwork of a UFO. And this is the movement that it took when he stepped away from the car to get a better look at it. He then walked into this field and looked at the craft. So this is what Barney saw, figures on the craft through his binoculars. He said that they were non-human, and then something started to drop down out of the bottom of the craft, and he became terrified, running back to Betty, screaming that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. This is the sketch that Barney drew when he arrived home the following morning. I spoke about photographic evidence from one of my present day best cases. Here it is. That beam that I believe was coming down from the bottom of the craft as Barney was looking was a carrier beam. This is from a video that ran for only a couple of seconds before the camera shut down. But what was caught was this beam and what might possibly be an entity dropping off that beam. And here she is as she comes closer to the ground. You can see she's holding some kind of a wand. These are large feet. This is another photograph of a different entity. First, I found him sitting on the ground. I did a frame-by-frame analysis on this film. He then rose into the air, and it appears that he was sitting on something. He was bent at the knees, and his feet were attached to this structure. He's bent over, here's his head, and here are his arms. And then he came closer to the camera. He had this blue light to capture the 3 individuals who were taken to craft in this case. And he is wearing some kind of appliance on his head. Perhaps it is an antenna. And the witnesses described these sparkly blue orbs or dots swirling in the air. There was another entity seen on the film with a huge flash of light. This is headgear that it's wearing. You can see the body here. This is one of the arms. This is the other arm. And right here is a close-up from another frame. You can see what appears that it might be a chiseled nose, a couple of eyes, a mouth, a prominent chin. Back to the Betty and Barney Hill case. Barney entered the car and went speeding down the highway as this craft was moving back in his direction. He and Betty then heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds that were striking the trunk of the vehicle. It was about 12:10 a.m. now, and at about 2:30, they heard a second series of buzzing sounds and found themselves 30 to 35 miles south of where they had been. 12 miles south of the close encounter field and 24 miles south of Cannon Mountain, Betty and Barney found themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around. They remembered a roadblock, but they didn't know where or when it occurred. And they remembered a fiery orb that appeared to be sitting on the ground. This is a map of their route, their first stop, second stop, third stop, and fourth stop at the abduction site in Thornton. but they did not immediately find that abduction site, although they made trips to the White Mountains time and time again in an attempt to find that spot. If Betty and Barney had returned home along their route, it should have taken them 2.76 hours. So they would have arrived at about 3 o'clock in the morning here at Portsmouth, New Hampshire. However, they didn't arrive until 5:16 a.m. This is the close encounter route and the abduction site. There was troubling evidence when they arrived home. Their watches had stopped and never ran again. You can see that Betty's is stopped at 5:16. It stopped before that, actually, but she walked into the house and saw that her watch wasn't working, so she set it for the time when she arrived in the house, 5:16 a.m. And these are the earrings that she was wearing that night. They mysteriously were missing. She didn't realize it until they later appeared in a pile of leaves in her home. These are not Barney's best dress shoes. They're my husband's, actually. I did this artwork to demonstrate what his shoes looked like and the deep scratches or scrapes that were on the tops of his shoes. Betty found that her dress had been torn at the top of the zipper, on the hem, and the lining was torn from waist to hemline. And there were shiny spots on the trunk of their 1957 two-tone blue and white Chevy. I saw those spots 2 days later, and this is what I reconstructed from memory. My father's best friend, Chief of Police of Newton, New Hampshire, Buzz Sawyer, advised Betty and Barney to make a report to Project Blue Book at Pease Air Force Base in Newington, New Hampshire, the town next to where they live. And so the day after they arrived home, they made this report. And here are some highlights from the report. This is part of the actual report you see on the left. It changed direction abruptly. It stopped and hovered in the air. When it swooped down, it was the size of a dinner plate held at arm's length. While hovering, objects began to appear from the body of the object, like wings with the V shape extended. At this point, they decided to get out of the area and fast. Mrs. Hill watched by sticking her head out of the window, but her view was obstructed, and this prevented her observation of its full departure. They heard short, loud buzzes that they described like someone had dropped a tuning fork. This happened in Lincoln. They could feel these buzzes in their bodies and in the car. They heard them again about 30 miles south of Lincoln near Ashland, but they did not see the object at this time. Mrs. Hill described the flight pattern as erratic. It changed directions rapidly. During its flight, it ascended and descended numerous times very rapidly, and its flight was described as jerky, not smooth. Betty was intensely curious about what had occurred, so she took the first book that she had ever read on UFOs out of the Portsmouth Public Library. It was The Flying Saucer Conspiracy by Major Donald E. Kehoe, who was then the director of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, a group that was primarily populated by military officers, CIA officers, and scientists with interested citizens as well. And I'm going to quote part of Betty's letter to you. This is important in my mind. She's talking about the craft and Barney. As it glided closer, he was able to see inside this object, but not too closely. He did see many figures scurrying about as though they were making some hurried type of preparation. One figure was observing us from the windows. From the distance this was seen, the figures appeared to be about the size of a pencil, meaning at arm's length, and seemed to be dressed in some type of shiny black uniform. At this point, my husband became shocked and got back in the car in a hysterical condition, laughing and repeating that they were going to capture us. He started driving the car. The motor had been left running. As we started to move, we heard several buzzing sounds or beeping sounds, which seemed to be striking the trunk of the car. 10 days after this event, Betty had a series of 5 dreams. They occurred just before she woke up in the morning. Barney was working nights, so he was not at home. Her dreams contained information that of conscious recall that she had. And then she also dreamed that her car was surrounded by these very human-looking men in cadet uniforms. And they will walk to the craft and taken to examining rooms. And this man spoke to them very pleasantly in English with an accent. When these types of dreams occur just before you wake up in the morning, they can signify something that really occurred, but it is mixed with fantasy material because you are working through anxiety around whatever you're dreaming about. And I was lucky enough that Betty wrote down all of her dreams and then typed them as well, because I did a comparative analysis of Betty's and Barney's statements from memory, the statements in Betty's dreams, and then the statements Betty and Marty made during hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Simon. For comparative analysis, I wanted to know if this was a real event. Betty sat down and wrote a report to Walter Webb and to NICAP, as I stated. Walter Webb was an astronomer at the Hayden Planetarium, and this is his confidential Massachusetts Subcommittee Unit 1 NICAP report dated October 26, 1961. He wrote it several days after he spent about 8 hours interviewing Betty and Barney. And an important part of this is as follows. He's talking about Barney. The approaching UFO finally filled up the entire field of the binoculars. The leader at the window held a special attraction for the witness and frightened him terribly. The witness said he could almost feel this figure's intense concentration to do something, to carry out a plan. Mr. Hill believed that he was going to be captured like, quote, a bug in a net, close quote. That is when he knew it was no conventional aircraft he was observing, but something alien and unearthly, containing beings of a superior type, beings that were somehow not human. So this is just additional evidence of Barney's conscious, continuous recall of information that was not for the first time brought forth through hypnosis. This was stated a couple of years before Barney had his first hypnosis session. And it was lucky that they had an astronomer and scientist investigate their case. Here are some quotes from Walter Webb's report. The band of lights was not continuous around the object, but occupied about half the entire rim, and the other half was dark, causing a twinkling or blinking effect as the object rotated. The UFO came around to the front of the car and stopped in midair to the right of the highway, 80 to 100 feet above the ground. The lighted edge of the object, a double row of windows through which cold bluish-white fluorescent glow shone, was visible, and a red light on each side of the object was seen. The UFO was no longer spinning. Mr. Hill braked the car to a halt, but left the headlights on and the engine running. He opened the door on his side and stepped out onto the highway for a better look through the binoculars. At that moment, the UFO shifted position from right to left in front of the car and hovered midair. Barney followed it when it moved across the highway. The object tilted downward slightly and began descending slowly in his direction. Now he could see 8 to 11 separate figures watching him. They were dressed in black shiny uniforms and caps with peaks or bills on them. Suddenly there was a burst of activity. Everyone turned in unison toward what seemed like a panel, and only one remained at the window. The craft filled up the entire field of binoculars. The one at the window showed an intense concentration that Barney could almost feel to carry out a plan. Barney believed that he was going to be captured like, quote, a bug in a net. That is when he knew it was no conventional aircraft, but something alien and unearthly, containing beings of a superior type, beings that were somehow not human. The object was now 50 to 80 feet up and possibly 50 to 100 feet away. This bothered Barney terribly. He had all of this physical evidence, and he did not want to think of it. But Betty was so incredibly inquisitive. She wanted to learn all she could. Finally, his emotional distress became a life-threatening condition. In 1963, he was admitted to the hospital with life-threatening bleeding ulcers and high blood pressure. And this led to a referral to a famous psychiatrist from Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. Benjamin Simon was famous for developing a hypnosis technique using deep trance hypnosis to resolve issues that were physiological in nature, but were psychologically generated. He used this type of hypnosis very successfully during World War II to help soldiers returning from the front. He was the chief of neuropsychiatry at the Mason General Hospital on Long Island, New York at that time, and a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He was late in his career when he saw Betty and Barney. He hypnotized the Hills separately, and then he reinstated amnesia at the end of each session. He did not want one to know what the other had stated, and so on and so forth. He did hypnoanalysis on Barney, who was his primary patient, and hypnotherapy on Betty because she had some of her own working through to do. Under hypnosis, they did remember being taken to the craft by these entities. Betty underwent physical examination. They were very interested in both Betty's and Barney's skin, in their skeletal structure, their muscular structure, and they inserted a needle into Betty's navel years before amniocentesis was being used in a hospital setting in the United States. Also, they took a sperm sample from Barney. Here are some messages and impressions that Betty and Barney stated under hypnosis. Don't be afraid. You don't have any reason to be afraid. We're not going to harm you. We just want to do some tests. And when the tests are over with, we'll take you and Barney back and put you in your car, and you'll be on your way back home. Don't worry. If we decide to come back, we'll be able to find you. We will be able to find you all right. We always find those who want to. This causes me to wonder if they had already visited Betty in the past, but she couldn't remember it. Barney's talking about the ETs said, he did not speak in words. I was told what to do by his thoughts, making my thoughts understand. And I could hear him, and I could not understand. And yet I could understand him, and I was told I would not be harmed. Under hypnosis, Betty remembered telepathic communication as well, And this was different from Betty's dreams. Barney also was asked by Dr. Simon if he felt that he'd been kidnapped. And he said, I do not feel that I was kidnapped because when I think of kidnapping, I think that someone was harmed, and I wasn't harmed. It certainly had a huge psychological impact on him. He was terrified, but he was not physically harmed. And then moving on after therapy, this therapy was very successful for Betty and Barney, I'm happy to say. 1965, when it was their 6 months of separate hypnosis and also therapy with Dr. Benjamin Simon had been completed, they went on with their work. And by 1965, it was a great year for them. They worked on Lyndon Johnson's presidential campaign. There they are in the forefront with the New Hampshire delegation. And here I am. I was a member of the student council at my school. Betty and Barney were wonderful role models for me. And I was invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration for the work that I did as well. And this is my invitation. Also, Barney was given an award by Sergeant Shriver, who was from the National Commission on the Economic Opportunity, and by Governor John King and Charles Whitmore from New Hampshire's Economic Opportunity Director. And this award was for the work he did setting up the Rockingham County Community Action Program to help the less fortunate members of Rockingham County. He was the chairman of the board of directors, and Betty worked right beside him, but Barney received the recognition for his work. He was also appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights that year. He was very proud of that. You know, the disinformants try to make you believe that Barney was a very fearful man and weak man who would do anything that Betty told him to. Valerie Cunningham is an African-American historian who knew Barney, and she stated, quote, Barney was fearless and outspoken. I knew Barney for years, and her statement is absolutely correct. Barney also set up a literacy program in the state of New Hampshire through the Archdiocese of Manchester, New Hampshire, because in those days, people had to pass a literacy test in order to vote. So this was very important in New Hampshire politics and national politics as well. Betty and Barney never intended to release their story to the public. It was to always remain confidential. They were willing to speak to scientists, to military officers, to UFO investigators, and to family members and close friends, but we were all sworn to secrecy. But in October of that year, the Boston Traveler carried articles for 5 nights in a row on Betty's and Barney's incident. It was extraordinarily devastating to Betty and Barney as individuals due to the high esteem that they were held in the state of New Hampshire, and also Barney nationally. And this is when we met as a family and decided that Betty and Barney should go public with their story. I have to say that John Luttrell was very respectful to Betty and Barney. He did not write about their story skeptically. He did not mischaracterize them as individuals. I'm pleased with what he did. He did a very thoroughly investigated journalistic series of articles. In fact, he even found 6 witnesses to the craft that night when that article was published. Later, he found 6 more. As proof that Betty and Barney were not pleased about this violation of confidentiality, Dr. Simon wrote as follows. This is a quote. He, meaning Luttrell, requested an interview with me, which I refused, informing him that I would not discuss the Hills case without their written consent, and that even with their written permission, any discussion would have to depend on my judgment of its potential effect on their emotional health. A month or 2 later, Mr. Hill, in considerable distress, called to say that the reporter had approached them for an interview, which they had refused. He, the reporter, claimed to have the data on the case, which he would publish without an interview with them if they refused to comply. I also have a letter from John Luttrell, and in it, he identified a friend of Betty's, a woman in which she confided, who violated confidentiality and told him everything she knew about the case. These are some statements from his report. The writer, he said that there was a falsified Blue Book report that came out in 1965. He said, the writer of the falsified report, typed report, made a mistake by dating it September 21, 1965, instead of September 21, 1961, when it was made. The adjusted report no longer mentions the craft's unusual flight pattern and the Air Force's own radar report. In my opinion, Luttrell did a service to the Hills when he revealed evidence of a cover-up. He had spoken to officials at NICAP who informed him of the government cover-up on UFO reports. The family encouraged Betty and Barney to speak about their UFO sighting, but not their abduction. So they decided to do that on November 3rd, 1965, at the Unitarian Church in Dover, New Hampshire, and you can see it at the top left. At that church that was just packed with people, it was a night where it was cold and sleeting. The weather was very bad, but the church was filled. The basement of the church was filled, and people were waiting outside in the inclement weather, just trying to capture a glimpse of the Hills or hear what they were saying. Inside was John G. Fuller, an author who was in New Hampshire writing a book on UFO sightings in New Hampshire that was later titled The Incident at Exeter. He took Betty and Barney out to dinner that night and offered them a proposal for a book. Also was Rear Admiral Herbert Knowles. Rear Admiral Knowles was a personal friend of Betty and Barney, highly esteemed military officer who gave them support and much more. The book, The Interrupted Journey, was published in the fall of 1966, and preceding the release of the book were 2 articles in Look magazine. And let me just move myself so you can see. Aboard a Flying Saucer, the incredible story of 2 people who believed they were kidnapped by humanoids in a spacecraft. They went to my high school graduation and photographed me with the family. Then in 1975, the movie, The UFO Incident, starring James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons, was made for television. And unfortunately, it was not an accurate rendition of what occurred. There were some inaccuracies in John Fuller's book that the publisher insisted upon, although he did the best that he could do. This is the timeline. For the UFO sighting, 1961. The reports, 1961. The hypnosis, 1963 through 1964. Public awareness, 1965 and 1966, September. And the false information began in late 1966 and increased with the release of the movie in 1975. I want to show you the way that the pseudo-skeptics and disinformants generated false information and speculation. This is Philip Klass, who was the mainstream media's go-to guy for false information. They didn't know it, but he was disseminating false information. Stanton Friedman and I did a tremendous amount of research. You saw us at the beginning of this presentation at the American Philosophical Society. We have his FBI file, and he was twice under investigation by the FBI in connection with the publication of unauthorized classified information. They could have prosecuted him if they were willing to release this classified information, but they did not want to release it for the purposes of prosecution. He was also a volunteer on Project Blue Book, inventing false explanations for UFO cases. He did more to distort the public's understanding of the Betty and Barney Hill UFO encounter than anyone else. He was also under investigation for espionage before he began his active debunking and disinforming work. I believe, as does Stanton and others in this field, that he was under pressure by the government to work for them in order to clear his name. They are known to have done this. And here are a couple of Stanton's quotes that refer to Philip Klass and his ilk of disinformants. "Don't bother me with the facts. My mind is made up. What the public doesn't know, we certainly won't tell them." Here are some false statements by Philip Klass. He said the UFO was a glowing object. The Hills saw ball lightning. Does this look like ball lightning to you? He said that Barney turned off the highway onto narrow, winding roads due to his fear of being captured. If you had a UFO hovering over you on the main highway and you were looking for police officers, as Barney was, would you turn on to a narrow, winding road where it was certain to capture you? Klass's reasoning is simply distorted. He also wrote, on board the flying saucer, one of the spacemen was sufficiently familiar with the mechanics of life on Earth to be able to zip and unzip her dress without assistance. And I guess we can see this, right, in the damage to the dress when she arrived home. This is the zipper. She had to help the examiner unzip her dress after he tore the stitching and broke this part of the zipper and tore the thick zipper fabric. Carl Sagan didn't bother to do his research. He only took quotes from Philip Klass, disinformant. He wrote, during a late night in 1961 through the White Mountains of New Hampshire, Betty spotted a bright star-like UFO that seemed to follow them. Because Barney feared they might harm them, They left the main highway for narrow mountain roads. That illogical quote is repeated. And here we have another repeated series of misinformation, false statements by Susan Clancy, PhD from Harvard. Shame on her. She should do her homework. But it appears that she was only attempting to dismiss this case with false information. She wrote one night in 1961, they had been driving in the White Mountains. Betty had spotted a bright star-like object that seemed to be pursuing them. Nervous, they had turned off the main highway onto narrow mountain roads, arriving home 2 hours later than expected. False, false, false repeats of Philip Klass's disinformation. This is what Stanton Friedman has to say about that. Do one's research by proclamation rather than investigation. It is much easier, and nobody will know the difference anyway. And certainly Susan Clancy and Carl Sagan didn't. This is one of Philip Klass's books. He wrote in it, the alleged abduction was not a shared experience. One could detect the terror in Barney's voice. In fact, at times she sounded as casual as if she had been describing a trip to the supermarket. Well, Stanton Friedman says, if one can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. Now let's see what Betty actually stated under hypnosis.
We're driving along. I don't know where we are. I don't even know how we got here. Barney and I, we've been driving, and I don't know how long, and we haven't even been talking. I just been sitting here feeling that something's going to happen. And I'm not really too afraid. Except right now I am. At that time I didn't feel afraid. Right now, but I wasn't afraid. I was afraid when I saw the men on the road. I've never been so afraid in my life.
Betty fought for her life as they attempted to take her onto the craft. This is one of the incidents where she tore her dress. Also, that examiner who had a large needle attempted to insert it, and she was weeping, "Don't do it, don't do it. It will hurt." And he plunged it into her navel anyway, causing incredible pain. This is a quote by Dr. Simon about Betty's marked agitation during the procedure that appeared to be taking place in the strange object, the apparent medical examination. Tears were running down Betty Hill's cheeks. Her nose was running, although she accepted a Kleenex quite readily. It was thought best to stop at this point, even though she was in the operating room, because of the degree of agitation that has ensued. An afternoon in the supermarket? I don't think so.
Is there anything else you're thinking that you haven't
This
told
is
me?
Barney's statement.
Yes. Yes. You can tell me now. I am only thinking of mental pictures because my eyes are closed. And I think I am going up a slight incline and my feet are not bumping on the rocks. That's funny. I thought of my feet bumping on the rocks.
And they're going up smoothly, but I'm afraid to open my eyes because I am being told strongly by myself to keep my eyes closed. Don't open them, he said. This is the point at which Barney's shoes were so deeply scraped that he had to purchase new shoes. And now let's get on to the scientific evaluation of the evidence. I told you about Betty's dreams, and this figure that she remembered from her dreams, very human looking, skin was slightly grayish, the lips were slightly bluish, but otherwise very human looking and dressed in a cadet's uniform. Well, the allegation has been made that Barney absorbed the information from Betty's dreams. This is absolutely false. Barney heard a little bit of the information in Betty's dreams, but not much of it. And he was irritated with Betty. He certainly did not want to hear what she had to say. This is the entity that Betty and Barney described under hypnosis, and that they left a written description of. This is my painting of that entity. And I have observed this entity as well. Everything that Barney recalled was in Betty's dreams. That's absolutely false. And the fact is, my line-by-line comparative analysis of the hypnosis tapes refutes the dream hypothesis, and all of this information is in my book. Well, when Betty was on the craft and after her physical examination, she said to the leader, whom she had begun to trust at this point, "Where is your home port?" And he reached to an opening in the wall, and he produced this three-dimensional star map with the stars that glowed. They were different colors, and some were larger than others. And some were connected by solid lines, and some by dotted lines. And Dr. Simon told Betty if she could remember this map accurately and it didn't trouble her too much, she should go home and sketch it. This is her sketch. Well, there had been a great deal of work done on this by a brilliant woman from Ohio named Marjorie Fish. It took her several years to find a match. And finally, after we made technological progress and had better distance data, she was able to find a match. This is Zeta Reticuli 1, Zeta Reticuli 2 in the constellation, the Net in our southern hemisphere. And this is our sun. The interesting thing is that all the stars on Betty's map are sun-like, although only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood out 54 light years in all directions are sun-like. And all of the stars on Betty's map in this volume of space are sun-like. So they make sense. Nearest star, nearest star. They're in a plane. This is a logical pattern for space travel. And one of the astrophysicists who analyzed Marjorie's work stated this. There has been an update in 2013 based on 2,289 models. And what the young astrophysicist discovered is that the Fish model is the closest match of the nearest stars in our local galactic neighborhood, out 54 light years, 89% accurate. She said there might be two stars that are a better fit. A clear pattern of exploration emerged based on what we know about exoplanets and the ability to remotely detect potential life-bearing worlds. And that seemed anything but random. Furthermore, it was based on information that was not known to anyone on Earth. In 1961, or until recently. These are quotes from the letter she wrote. Betty also passed a polygraph test with no evidence of deception on May 23rd, 1982, after Barney had died at age 46 in 1969. It was for the F. Lee Bailey lie detector show. He was a criminal attorney and noted expert on lie detection with 28 years experience. And Ed Gulb was an expert witness and past president of the American Polygraph Association. The first question was, did you obtain the star map from a source other than a UFO? Betty answered, no. Do you believe your story is a hoax? No. Betty passed with no sign of deception. Well, scientists have done many analyses on Betty's dress. Most recently, I was at the University of New Hampshire with a former FBI agent who is working in our field, and we discovered these spots in the area of Betty's navel on the lining of her dress, but these spots were not made from the outside, from the exterior. There was no spotting there. So MUFON's laboratory did a DNA test on these spots in 2020. And the scientist wrote, quote, it must be concluded that this stain came from body fluids of the wearer of the dress. The most recent study was done at the University of Pittsburgh in 2021. And the scientists there found rare, expensive metals with a high melting point on Betty's dress. There is no logical earthly explanation for the presence of these metals on Betty's dress. Then going back to 2001 through 2003, Frontier Analysis Laboratory did an extensive chemical analysis on Betty's dress, and briefly, the chemical analysis supports Betty's account of the event. Phyllis Budinger, who has a master's degree in chemistry and was an analytical chemist for BP Amoco, formerly Standard Oil, for 35 years, did this testing. And before that, Pinelandia Biophysics Laboratory in 2000 did a bioassay test growing seedlings with plain water and then with water in which Betty's dress, the pink powder, was soaked. And their statement was that the seedlings from Betty's dress growth developed at an unusually fast rate, which was highly unusual. And then in 1977, the University of Cincinnati did a very thorough analysis as well. They wrote, the white on Betty's dress is strange in relation to its inorganic elemental compound. It is high in organic hydrocarbons. Again, many scientific analyses without a conventional explanation. So what are the primary implications for humanity's future? I have worked for many, many years in this field, well, 32 full-time to be precise. And in the 3 major studies that I worked on with 5,000 experiencers, 2 of those were with PhD scientists. We had open-ended questions. And here are some of the answers we received that are representative of the entire group. They, meaning the ETs, have conveyed the same cautionary remarks guarding our stewardship of planet Earth to experiencers across our planet. We must preserve resources, and if we don't, we will experience a decrease in population. Our technological progress is out of balance with our spiritual growth, and this is a danger to our planet. The ETs have been collecting DNA from flora and fauna for 70 years or more. When our governments refused to meet with them, they went directly to the people around the world. They are here to protect our quadrant of the galaxy. They mean no harm. They work quietly so they will not be perceived as invaders. There is much fear-based information about them that is not true. And finally, here I am in the latest documentary that I have worked on regarding the Betty and Barney Hill case. Every other documentary historically has led viewers to believe that Betty and Barney did not have a memory immediately of seeing this very large craft hovering overhead and Barney observing the non-human figures on the craft. They did not talk about Betty and Barney finding themselves on this dirt road and always remembering this, the roadblock and the fiery orb sitting on the road. I was very instrumental in helping the producers of this documentary to gain access to my archival files, all of my research files from this case. And I am so happy to say they told the truth. It's available on Discovery Plus. This is my latest book. It's on my personal struggle with the unknown that has carried me through the twists and turns and glimpses of mysterious realities. I reveal my coveted work and the secret knowledge I have acquired through groundbreaking research and experimentation. It includes my personal journey from alien abduction to spiritual transformation. This is multi-generational in about 60% of our families. Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, my 60th anniversary updated edition with all the new information and scientific analysis. And here are my other 4 books: Science Was Wrong with Stanton Friedman, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, The History of Government Involvement in the Investigation of UFOs in the United States, their major studies, their findings, their decision to cover up their findings, and those who were appointed to work on that cover up through disseminating false information. The alien abduction files, 6 cases of alien abduction that I wrote about. One of those was with Denise Stoner and about my investigation of her case. And then extraterrestrial contact, what to do when you've been abducted. And that is for experiencers of contact who want to know what to do, how to investigate their own cases, how to process all of this. It's for those who want to help them, for psychotherapists and hypnotherapists, and the general public who's concerned about all of this and wants to know more. Some of my very best cases are in this book. And my website is Kathleen-Marden.com. There is a translator on my website, so you can read it in your language, I believe. And so I now, in closing, want to thank you so much for listening. It was such a pleasure to be with you today. I only wish that I could have been there in person.